And Kiana, your special job is to make sure people feel brave enough to walk across the stage to get into seats, to be part of this. I'm finding it's hard to judge my distance from the mic. You give me a thumbs up if things are good. Excellent. I am Professor Yarrow. It is my honor to chair the Classics Department of Brooklyn College. This program is super important to me because it's not just about classics. It's about how you can start in classics and go and do anything. And it centers a commitment to students that I want to embody in my own career, and I want reflected in everything this institution does. That we are here at the City University of New York to push our students forward, to allow them to achieve things that they did not arrive here imagining that they could do. That is the commitment that Professor Smith had, and this is what we are honoring and celebrating today. Let me walk you through the program so you know what to expect. The first thing that's going to happen is our wonderful President Anderson, who's here to support everything we're doing here, but also the work we do to continue Gail's legacy on this campus and CUNY-wide. After she gives her welcome address, I am sorry to say that Patrice Rankine had a family emergency. He asked me to reflect for you on the circle of life, that as we move through births and deaths and all of the points in between, sometimes we are called to step away from our commitments and instead focus on what matters most, being with our family and supporting them. And I want you all to hold Patrice and his family tight in your hearts right now. He insisted, I told him to cancel. He insisted on recording his lecture this morning. And he is on the live stream now if he is able to do so, watching and being with us in spirit. And I am so touched that his love for Gail was so deep that he wanted to do this at a time when he has deep family commitments. Because we all need to role model stepping away and being with our family when that's where we belong. After Patrice's lecture, we are going to hear first from Lucas Rubin, who's the current director of the Latin Greek Institute. He's going to talk about Gail's legacy there, and then also how we keep that legacy alive and growing and building it. That's the theme of this, how we are honoring Gail's memory through the work we continue to do now. Then we're going to hear from our very own Linda Day, who's our director of the Mellon Mays Fellowship Program, a program that Gail Smith brought to this campus. And then we're going to hear from Eric Jansen? Frankson. I'm sorry, Eric. We had a program change. Another sad fact is that Martin Ruck could not be here for his own health reasons today. And he has sent Eric, who runs the pipeline program at the Graduate Center, to represent and speak on behalf of the program and all of Gail's commitments during her time at the Graduate Center. And then finally, and this is going to be a lot of fun, if a bit unusual for many of us, Professor Van Sickle is going to present a Latin Ovatio, and you should all have both the text and the translation so you can follow along. It's not so long, but I'm going to tell you that he's a beautiful rhetorician, and you are going to enjoy the sound of it even if you don't understand each word. We can appreciate the beauty of language and perhaps be inspired by that beauty to dig deeper into it. So without further ado, I'd like to invite President Anderson up here for her introduction. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. It's so nice to be here, and I really want to welcome you all and say, on behalf of the entire Brooklyn College family, we extend our deepest condolences to the family members, to the friends of Gail Smith and to the entire Brooklyn College community of colleagues that she had. This is an important time for us to come together, and we are very honored to be here in this room with you. I'd like to thank Classics Professor Lee Viero from Humanities and Social Sciences and the many other departments and offices who helped put this day together, this event together, including Africana Studies, and where Gail touched so many students, not just in the Classics department. I also want to give a special thank you to Renee Johnson Thornton and the Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship Research Fellowship Program leaders and participants who are here, and the Mellon Foundation itself. The Mellon Mays Undergraduate Foundation or Fellowship Program, which Gail helped establish here in 1989, obviously was very close to her heart, and it launched so many students on their way, transforming what was possible in their lives. So what an incredibly important program to have here at the college. That program is now ably led by Professor Linda Day, who I also want to thank, who is here. We rotate the responsibility of shepherding these kinds of programs, and I know that it's a heavy lift at times, Linda, and I do appreciate your devotion and commitment to the program. It's fitting that we have another classicist who is celebrated, a professor from the Department of Classics at the University of Chicago, Patrice Rankine. Unfortunately, as you heard, he couldn't be here today. I look forward to his remarks that are recorded. He earned his BA in 1992 from Brooklyn College, studying ancient Greek and the classics here, and he also completed the Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship Program. And I really want to thank you for trying to come home here, Patrice, if you're able to listen to us, and I wish you the very best with whatever family matters you must attend to. We all certainly understand in our own lives that these things happen. Gail Smith herself was not only an incredibly accomplished and respected classicist here at Brooklyn College, she was also something of an institution in her own right, having served students here at Brooklyn College and across CUNY for half a century. Her contributions are really too many to list. I know we're going to hear some of them today, which will be exciting and very interesting. But I will say that her unwavering commitment to transforming access to the institution here, enhancing excellence in the classroom, and supporting underserved students was legendary. These commitments have never been more important at Brooklyn College and across higher education. And I hope that all of us carry a flame in our hearts, a part of the torch that Gail Smith carried for so many decades here at Brooklyn College. Gail loved Black authors, so many of them, and her enthusiasm for sharing their works created another legacy for her students and for her colleagues. Zora Neale Hurston, the Great, was one of her favorites, and I thought I'd share a line from Zora Neale Hurston with you all. It really salutes Gail's passion. Quote, "Research is formalized curiosity. It is poking and prying with a purpose," end quote. The college's Magisterial Femina, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, but I'm sure I will be corrected. The exhibit is here in the library, and it's one way that the college is remembering the formalized curiosity of trailblazing faculty like Gail, who immerse themselves in poking and prying with a purpose. It was curated by history professor Lauren Mancia, an assistant dean for academic programs and director of the Latin and Greek Institute, Lucas Rubin, who we'll hear from later on today. I would urge you to spend some time today walking over to the exhibit and really taking it in. It's beautiful, and it really is another part of our tribute to Gail's life and legacy here. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. I'm going to move straight into the recording, but bear with us while we do the swap over.
Good Good afternoon, everyone. Hello to all the esteemed guests present. Professor Anderson, I regret that I am not able to see you in person. I was looking forward to seeing you again and catching up. All the colleagues in classics, and especially to Lee Yarrow, who has been such a stabilizing and wonderful force for the department in connecting generations past, present, and future. This event would not happen and would not be what it will be were it not for the efforts of Professor Yarrow. You all probably know by now, family emergency was the only thing that could have kept me from you. And yet, in the wild and wonderful world we're living in, Zoom makes a recording possible, and I'm grateful for that, although I wish I could be there. Before I get too far along, I do want to reintroduce myself and give you a little background that I believe will convey a bit about my relationship to Gail T. Smith, Professor of Classics. You heard that my name is Patrice Rankine, but as a college student at Brooklyn College from 1988 to 1992, I went by Paul Rankine. Paul is the name by which my teachers, Professor Smith and others, knew me. Becoming Patrice probably seemed strange to them, as though I went off to graduate school at Yale and changed my identity. This is not the case. The full name on my birth certificate is Patrice DePaul Rankine. As a child, I grew up on East 38th Street, just a mile from campus, and I was not too pleased that my parents named me Patrice, although they named me after Patrice Lumumba, which I later realized. Most of my elementary school teachers knew that I went by Paul, the family name that members called me, and sometimes Pablo to my Cuban-born maternal grandmother. Whenever there was a substitute for a new teacher, they would roll call, and the Patrice that would be called out, justifiably, after all, this was my government name, but it just grated on my young nerves. For those perhaps listening or live streaming this event today and not seeing me, I am a boy. In the parlance of the day, I can now say that I have always gone by he, his, him pronouns. So for a boy in Brooklyn who at one point carried around a cardboard on which to breakdance with his friends, I was never any good, incidentally, Patrice would not do. My name had to be Paul, or maybe even Paulie D. In any event, at some point in grade school at PS 119, my mother came in to make a permanent note on my transcript. I can see it now as if it were written yesterday, like the Declaration of Independence in big, bold letters. Called Paul. And from then on, I was miraculously converted, perhaps like Saul on the road. Paul. So, in turning back the hands of time to when I began at Brooklyn College in fall of 1988, I was Paul Rankine. At that time, Brooklyn College had a well-regarded core curriculum. As students, we were told that there were 10 core courses, the first of which was Core 1, Classical Origins of Western Civilization. In truth, some of these courses extended for a year and consisted of 2 parts, like biology and physics, each 1 semester. The core was in reality more like 12 courses. In addition, there was a language requirement. I'll spare you any elaborate background as to why I picked ancient Greek to fulfill my language requirement, but suffice it to say that this was BG before Gail. In those months of my first semester, BG, all I knew was that ancient Greek was the language that our pastors sometimes uttered from the pulpit to clarify some passage or other from the New Testament. In those early months of fall 1988, it made sense that in my pursuit of learning, I choose the familiar but not mundane. Spanish was everywhere. I'd taken Regent Spanish in high school and could return to it at any time. But something new was being offered to me, ancient Greek. This seemed like a passageway to a time at the foundation or root of it all. And here was this school a mile away offering that language. So I chose ancient Greek before Gail, and I need to add one additional life-altering event for which Professor Smith would come to be instrumental. This event transpired before I met Professor Smith, before taking her Core 1 course, and before other Greek and Latin classes she would teach me. During that first year at Brooklyn College, I was assigned a faculty advisor who happened to be Dean Kathy Glover. I don't know if she's able to be there today, but she's another person about whom I speak a great deal and who, it turns out, had a lovely friendship with Professor Smith. When Dean Glover saw my interest in ancient Greek after that first semester and the courses in which I was enrolled, she asked what I planned to do with this education. Since I was accustomed to rebuff that these courses were perhaps impractical, I am sure I didn't have a good response, but Dean Glover had something else in mind. She wondered if I might have ever considered teaching at the college level. There would be a new program for which I could apply. The program would begin in my sophomore year, and I could apply for it during the spring of this first college year. The program was the Mellon Minority, now Mellon Mays, Undergraduate Fellowship, MMUF, for underrepresented students who would continue on to graduate school in humanistic fields at the time. Professor Smith was named the program coordinator at Brooklyn College, one of several campuses to launch MMUF. By the early 2000s, the program would come to impact over 100 underrepresented undergraduate students who have earned their PhDs across the country and world at some of the most prestigious institutions. That number has, of course, ballooned and must now be in the thousands and includes college and university presidents like Ben Vinson III, who was just named to the presidency at Howard University. And shout out to the MMUF students who are probably in the room. To say that the MMUF was, for me, life-altering would be an understatement. What I did not realize until this past July 2023 at Professor Smith's founding memorial was the extent to which this event, becoming the founding director of MMUF, had a profound impact on her as well. For years, I kept a picture of that first MMUF cohort, my cohort, with me on my desk at graduate school, at my first academic job at Purdue University. Several moves and transitions later, that picture has landed in my basement, and I meant to dig it out in July when I heard of Professor Smith's passing. Lo and behold, a copy of that same picture was projected at her memorial service. That day, Professor Smith's great niece, Melissa, told me I'd see many more copies at the repast. And indeed, that image sat on every single picnic table at the family home. Our matriarch, Gail Smith, at the center, face and eyes beaming, surrounded by her surrogate children, an MMUF cohort. I believe I even remember the event at which it was taken, a lecture that Professor Smith brought to campus for us as part of the rich intellectual and cultural experience the program promised. Arnold Rampersad, who had just released the second volume of his biography of Langston Hughes, spoke that day. Shortly after, Professor Smith would go on to become the founding director of the CUNY Pipeline Program, and after 1991, she would spend more time at her office in Manhattan than in Brooklyn. But the grounds had already been laid for us. I would go on to study abroad in Rome with the Intercollegiate Center for Classical Studies, which Mellon helped to fund. In 1992, I also left Brooklyn for graduate school in Connecticut. But I would sometimes stop by Professor Smith's office in Manhattan whenever I was in town. Most memorable to me were those occasions when I came to know her not just as my professor, but as a senior colleague, a peer, and then a friend. By 1998, I had moved to Indiana for a professorship at Purdue. I continued to visit New York, though. On 2 separate occasions, Gail and I went to see Denzel Washington on Broadway. First, he played Marcus Brutus in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar during the 2004 and 2005 season. And then, in 2018, we saw him play the lead character in Eugene O'Neill's Iceman Coming, which put Denzel in the stratosphere with James Earl Jones as the only black actors to play that role on Broadway. These experiences for me over 3 decades secured a kind of friendship with Gail that someone might hope for with a person they deeply admire, whether a mentor or a parent. Over time, you come to see your mentor in a different light. The relationship deepens. And in those cases, you all know that even if you see the person once a year, you pick up right where you left off, like an open book. I wanted to paint this picture of Professor Smith as a mentor and teacher and then friend that I admired before coming to her status and stature as a classicist. I did not know it at the time, but her commitment to Mellon and pipeline programs, her quiet consistency, and yes, even her love for Denzel, tell us a great deal about her vocation. In the memorial posted at the CUNY Graduate Center website, Lee Viaro was kind to quote me as saying that I didn't know Professor Smith as a black professor per se, but simply as one of my professors of classics. Consider that I would have met Gail when I was 17 years old, and not having been raised in a world of higher education, I would not have known how rare it would be to have had not only one, but 2 professors in a Department of Classics at Brooklyn College who happened to be of African descent. The other, of course, was Professor Mervyn Kaiser, whose name you'll notice as part of Professor Smith's hyphenated moniker. Likewise, in those early years, I knew of no such thing as black classicism, and Gail would not have either. In fact, it's a title by which I have come simultaneously to be repulsed and with which to be at a reluctant peace. It has its usefulness. That said, if we are really to reflect on the life and meaning of Professor Smith as a classicist, we should also come correct with the historical context. After all, she took her PhD in 1972. I imagine Gail in her late 20s at the time. 1972 was only 8 years after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 in the United States, and 7 years since the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The year 1972 is only 4 years after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Not even 20 years had passed since the Little Rock Nine met state resistance in the form of the National Guard and their attempt to integrate a high school in Arkansas in 1957. 4 little girls lost their lives in the bombed-out 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. Lest we think these events were confined to the American South, in 1968, at Columbia University, right there in New York, where Gail took her Master's of Arts degree, that campus was embroiled in student protests like those that sent shockwaves across the country. These were protests both over Vietnam and also over segregation practices that continued right there in New York under the auspices of Columbia. I don't know what young Gail's life experiences were like in elementary, high school, or college and university. I hope to find out. from the family. But during this period of such political turmoil and social upheaval, I can imagine that the pressures to be exemplary pushed Gail to work extremely hard to polish her evident intellectual gifts and talents. Focus, dedication, and steadfastness, clarity of purpose, and a strong sense of self are only a few of the characteristics that I imagine got her through this period. Character traits that we would come to detect in her later accomplishments. Through it all, Gail became a classicist. It would be worth researching if any African Americans preceded her as Masters of Arts students at Columbia in classics, or as PhD students in classics at New York University. But I'm willing to bet some coins that there are few, if any. She was likely a first in several categories, and if not first, then the rare trailblazer, like the novelist Zora Neale Hurston, who studied anthropology at Columbia and about whom Gail would later write. In the early 2000s, I invited Gail to Purdue, where she lectured on the classical resonances in Their Eyes Were Watching God. In that post-civil rights era of the late 1960s and early 1970s, Gail did blaze a trail. She would write her dissertation on the importance of miracles to the religious faith of Plutarch of Chaeronea. Plutarch lived in the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era and is a name well known among classicists. Further afield, by the late 1500s, one of his books, The Parallel Lives of Noble Greeks and Romans, came to influence William Shakespeare, who derived from Plutarch an understanding of personalities like the Roman leader Coriolanus, or Julius Caesar, whose march on Rome and subsequent assassination signaled the end of the Roman Republic, or his avenger, Mark Antony. I didn't think about Gail's dissertation when I was a student, and as far as I know, she might not have had the opportunity to teach this author in depth very often, as someone who taught at a predominantly undergraduate institution, and then who dedicated herself to administration. When I watched Denzel play Brutus almost 20 years ago with Gail, I would not have thought to connect this to Plutarch. But Gail's mind must have been in high gear, seeing these characters from her author alive on stage in Shakespeare's play. Denzel transformed into Brutus. Over the course of the past few months, I've thought a bit more about these connections and recently read Gail's dissertation. I want to give you a sense of this work, which reminds me a bit of Toni Morrison's master's thesis on William Faulkner and Virginia Woolf, insofar as there are evident traces of what was to manifest in later interests. I'm struck first by Gail's sensitivity to Plutarch's position as a kind of outsider, a Greek living under Roman rule, although hearkening from what Gail describes as a prominent, well-to-do family. Plutarch's great-grandfather, Nicaros, and his peers, as she puts it, had been forced to carry on their backs wheat as a tribute to Mark Antony. A family friend of Plutarch had made friends with a cook in Antony's kitchen. From a wealthy family, but spending time with everyday people. Gail situates Chaeronea, Plutarch's birthplace, in time and space. In 338 BC, she writes it was the site of a battle and defeat under Philip of Macedon, and later, the location of an important Roman victory under Sulla in 86 BCE. Gail paints the following picture of the city. Quote, but the decline in the native population was not only due to commerce. Wars, too, had taken their toll, and the effects of immigration, warfare, and the diminution of political influence occasioned by the conquest of Alexander and the rise of Rome helped to reduce the Greece of Plutarch's day to the state of an aged dowager contemplating past memories, end of quote. The passage is clearly and beautifully written, even though I stumbled on a few words. That's my fault. This is a style that is diffused throughout the dissertation, free of any jargon or hints of scholarly airs. In addition to this, Gail's sympathy with the underdog shines through. This city is in decline, racked by war, and it is described as an aged widow whose glory is in the dust, a past life that the widow that she can only remember but will never have again. Rome's power then is total, like death itself, that takes the dowager's husband. Gail's observation is astute, deeply political, though subtle, and sensitive to the everyday lives left in the wake of imperial power. From this perspective of total domination at the hands of Romans, Gail reconstructs Plutarch's religious belief, a mix of philosophically informed and scientific possibilities with occult, hidden potentialities, where miracles are pervasive yet consistent with the laws of nature. She carefully reconstructs Plutarch's role as a priest of Apollo, which harkens to the past glories of ancestral gods in the context of what she names the failure of paternal religion to address itself to changing needs. In light of this incapacity, owing to the power of Roman rule, Plutarch and his contemporaries gradually converge to new religious practices. Gail puts the case as follows. It was a conversion from the traditional religious faith to a belief in magical and occult powers and potencies, which manifested in astrology, infallible revelation, transcendentalism, mysticism, and the cult of daimones. And in that belief, which has a particular interest for us, namely miracles. Gail concludes this thoroughly researched and erudite dissertation with the same tone of compassion and insight that I detect in her introductory remarks. Plutarch's belief was of the moment in the sense that he is one example of experiences other historical figures shared. In addition, his belief serves as a balm for that lost prestige and glory of his ancestral home, Chaeronea. For people living on the periphery of Roman rule, belief in God bespeaks the general benevolence of the world around us. The gods are good, and therefore hope for a supportive universe is warranted, whatever the principalities and powers weighing down on us in the political realm. Here is Gail's own words one last time. Quote, according to Plutarch, the gods love man because of his arete, or his excellence, which is divine. But they do not love him passively. They are actively concerned and solicitous over his welfare, end of quote. As I read through this dissertation, I was gaining a deeper sense of who Gail was, rising above her own historical time and context. I should add that this is a typewritten dissertation. Certain typographical marks that a typewriter could not make, such as the square brackets, are written by Gail's own hand. Greek text is also handwritten throughout. In its totality, the text is error-proof, with only a few signs of any typographical corrections. For the classicists, it is notable that Gail wrote a dissertation on a Greek author living under Roman rule. This allowed her to defy the norms in our field of having to choose between Greek and Latin as primary languages. She deployed both. Both languages were necessary to her work, which draws deeply also on her knowledge of classical philology, as well as from French and German sources. Let me say a few things in closing as I come to Gail's legacy and this lingering or latent question of Black Classicisms. As Lee and I talked between Gail's family memorial service and the repast at the family home where she spent her last days, we happened upon the topic of representation in our professional field and how much Gail mattered to this issue. There is the extremely public, though somehow unacknowledged, administrative work of rooting a program at Brooklyn College that has endured some 34 years and counting. The MMUF's tally of underrepresented minorities who have gone on to earn PhDs is no longer something I know, though we filled the Heard Museum in Atlanta at the 25th anniversary of the national program in 2014. This tally now includes women in such fields as physics. Others can speak to the influence of the CUNY Pipeline Program or the Office of Educational Opportunity and Diversity at CUNY Graduate Center, where Gail served as director for over a decade. I say this work is public, though unacknowledged, because Gail could not have, nor was she the type of person to keep a tally of the lives she impacted through the heavy lifting she did in these roles. And yet, here I am. I was going to say, here I stand before you, but no, here I am, nevertheless, though on Zoom, as one of those people impacted. In this area of representation, I would argue that there were already traces of Gail's more radical work in her academic writing, such as her dissertation. As I've intimated, Gail presents Plutarch from the perspective of underrepresentation, a defeated Greek subject living and working primarily on the periphery of the early Roman Empire. In this respect, Gail's dissertation paved the way for later history from below. Examples might include Amy Richmond's 2019 publication, Slave Theater in the Roman Republic, Plaudits and Popular Comedy, which takes seriously what characters in Plautus' comedy have to say about class, debt, and abuse at the hands of those socially superior to them. Or Daniel Peralta's Divine Institutions, Religions, and Community in the Middle Roman Republic, published in 2020. This book traces the consolidation of the state religions of Roman rule in juxtaposition with the religious traditions and practices of its subjects. I would contend that these publications are not possible without the groundwork that Gail laid. And incidentally, Gail published one of the commentaries to Plautus' plays, his Captives or Captivi. Whether or not the authors of these recent books knew Gail's works, they are indebted to her generation of scholars and the efforts they made to see the world from a perspective other than that of the majority or those in power. This all brings me finally to the issue of Black classicism. Inevitably, Professor Gail T. Smith will be remembered as a figure in Black classicism, but I think she would have chuckled at this idea and maybe would have found it ironic. I'll say again that I did not first know Gail as a Black classicist any more than I have known my own mother as a Black mother, or my father as a Black father, or my sister as a Black sister. Rather, they are sister, father, mother, and in Gail's case, teacher, mentor, and classicist. The framework of Black classicism is a phenomenon of the 21st century, a phrase coined by an extremely sympathetic scholar, woman, for a prolific scholar. I'm referring, of course, to Professor Michelle Valerie Ronick. Black classicism is a phrase that riffs on Meyer Reinhold's 1984 book, Classica Americana, the Greek and Roman heritage in the United States. Reinhold and other scholars like Carl Ricard saw that the Greeks and Roman classics were indelible markers of erudition and a rich resource of ideas for the American founders. if this was the case for the early Americans, and given the segregated realities of the United States for much of our history, it was inevitable that someone would come along to designate a classica africana, a Black American affinity for and deployment of this Greek and Roman heritage. I don't mean to dismiss the idea of Black classicism entirely, and as I have stated, it is a category that has been useful to me as often an N of one, useful for contextualizing my own presence in the field and my own work. And I'm sure that Gail, as time went on, also came to this framework as one useful to what she was trying to do. Black classicism makes visible the real and abiding ties between the deep European past and people of African descent. In such books as the 2012 publication, African American Writers and Classical Tradition, by William W. Cook and James Tatum, we learn about the poet Phyllis Wheatley's intimate knowledge of the classics and her process of revision, or Frederick Douglass's secondary or deutero learning of the Greek and Roman rhetorical styles of Demosthenes and Cicero through their English translation in the Columbian Orator, Caleb Bingham's 1797 publication. Here again, incidentally, two of the last testimonies at the website for Gail's memorial are recollections of her recent work on Phyllis Wheatley. So again, I think this framework was useful to her too as time went on. But I said I thought that Gail would find this framework of Black classicism ironic, and this is because rather than exceptional, it should be a natural expectation that people of African descent across the modern world would be versed in the classics, and that we would be contributors to the broader understanding of the legacy of the Greeks and Romans. In the minds of people of African descent, these legacies would vie for equal time with those of Yoruba and Igbo ancestors, as the Nigerian author Wole Soyinka displays in such works as the autobiographical Ake, The Years of Childhood. It is no accident, then, that Gail would come to give lectures on Wheatley or Hurston while remaining committed to Plautus and Plutarch. As I hope to have illustrated, though, Gail's work cannot be contained in an ethnic or racial subcategory of this academic field. Rather, in what she left behind, such as her dissertation, Gail demonstrates the perspectives that a plurality of viewpoints brings to intellectual understanding. And so, at 17 years old, in 1988, when young Paul Rankine, who happens to be a visible descendant of Africans enslaved in Jamaica, met Professor Gail T. Smith, he would not have known the significance of her presence or the impact she would come to have on his life. Paul could not have fully appreciated why representation matters, or that Professor Smith would spend her life making space for such representation in programs like the one into which he would soon be admitted. Paul did not know that he would come to share Gail's abiding vocation of the classics in common, or an adoration of Denzel Washington, who is not simply a Black actor who happens to play iconic characters, but rather an actor whose Blackness of experience infuses those mythic figures with new life. And he is exemplary, just one of many. So it would be left to Patrice to reassemble the pieces of the past and to make sense of them in memory of his professor, Gail T. Smith, whose legacy, I assure you, is right here with us.
A lot. Thank you, Patrice. It's hard to know what to say in response to that and how to transition us into further tributes. It felt so full, and I feel at this moment I understand better how my own work owes so much to the roads that Professor Smith walked, blazed for all of us in this room. The beginning of her journey in CUNY was with the Latin Greek Institute. At first, it was just the Latin Institute. We didn't have a Greek Institute. We had to make that up after the Latin one worked out okay. And so on that history, I want to bring up our resident expert, Lucas Rubin. I turn over the floor to you.
Thank you, Professor Nero. Condolences to the family on behalf of the Latin Greek Institute, and condolences for us all. This was a loss to the Brooklyn College community, to the discipline. This is how cool Gail Smith is. This photograph is actually her teaching Latin to the then chair of the Comp Lit department. Is it Dennis? What was his? Is it Dennis Feeney? No, it can't be. No, who is it? I'm sorry. Yeah, chair of Comp Lit. It's from 1973, which is pretty awesome. So I'm Lucas Rubin. I direct the Latin Greek Institute, for which Gail is just an extraordinary part of its history. Gail's a legend. She arrived at Brooklyn College in 1971 with what I call the great golden class, just a whole set of scholars that came in 71 and 72. Recruited at the time by Ethel Wolff, who was chair of classics at that time, and would go on to become provost and nationally renowned for her work in humanities. And she recruited those faculty in part because she had a vision of strengthening the humanities across the institution. And to that end, she really envisioned two institutes that would become foundational to this process. One was the Wolff Institute of Humanities. It wasn't called the Wolff Institute then, but it was subsequently in her honor. And the second was to develop an intensive program in the classical languages, initially Latin. And to that end, she recruited a newly minted PhD by the name of Floyd Moreland, who came over from Berkeley, where he had established the Latin Institute in 1967. As a graduate student, he had established an intensive language training program that was designed to teach 2.5 to 3 years of Latin in 50 days. I talked about this before, and I liken this to sort of like being a NASA astronaut, a NASA engineer, rather. Floyd arrives in 71, and Gail arrives that year, too. She didn't receive her PhD until the following year in 72 at NYU, but she arrives that year. Floyd learned, Professor Moreland, I call Floyd, we're good friends, learned that it required a very special type of person who could do this kind of crazy endeavor of teaching intensive languages in a compressed format. He's a man who suffers no fools. And he and Gail formed a very fast friendship and really deeply admired her as a scholar and also as a teacher. And actually, Floyd asked me to read something. Gail and I were very, very dear friends, both at Flatbush and then at the Graduate Center when the Institute began holding classes there. We used to walk down 42nd Street after classes and imbibe at the grill at the Oyster Bar. CUNY in the 70s. Near the end, I was in the hospital at the same time as she, and we talked and texted every single night about how quickly we would get better, and once again relived the wonderful times we had teaching. She always lifted my spirit as I fell asleep, and then the next morning I learned she had passed. I simply had no idea. She was a great colleague and a wonderful teacher with a loving sense of humor, and most of all, one of the most superb friends one could ever have, which I think is wonderfully stated. So Gail joined with Floyd and Rita Fleischer, who was an adjunct faculty member here, and they launched the Latin Institute in 1973. And Gail taught with us at the Institute until 1982. She taught the basic Latin program, and she taught in the advanced Latin program. And for a few years, she taught in both basic Latin and basic Greek, which is actually pretty crazy. It's an incredibly difficult learning environment to go and teach intensively one language and then literally walk across the hall and teach the other. Okay, maybe that's better.
You only go to the end of the L or you come off.
Okay. Well, it's not really-
The live stream. You can go to the end of the L in Gail's name.
Okay. Well, that's fine. I'll just stand right here. It's somehow I'm not interrupting the flow. So really just remarkable to the foundation of the Latin Greek Institute, which celebrated its 50th year today. Gail influenced the Institute in other ways as well. Central to the Institute has been developing a pipeline of individuals who otherwise do not have the resources or the background to have studied Latin or Greek. And that's central to the Institute, something that was near, as we've heard, to Professor Smith, and really increasingly the focus of her work in the latter half of her time here. And to that end, we are able to award scholarships to those that otherwise couldn't attend. We keep our costs down. And from 1994 to 2008, the number of historically underrepresented groups present as students in the Institute doubled, and doubled again after 2014. So that's a legacy we're really proud of, and something that was very near to Gail's heart and her work. On a personal note, when I was appointed director of the Institute, of which I was a graduate, I was very overwhelmed. It's something not to be taken lightly, and it's a legacy to which I am especially concerned. Gail reached out to me right away, and in the few years that we overlapped, she was a great go-to resource, and very much loved my interest in the history of the Institute. And on that note, please go next door on your way or after the reception and visit the Magisterial Feminae exhibition, which we had opportunity to put on last spring, that celebrates the work of many women from 1930 to 1980 involved in pre-modern studies, and Gail is really central to that, both for her work at the college, the discipline, and the Institute. In perpetua magistra ave atque vale. Thank you very much.
I don't envy Linda because Patrice said many things about the Mellon Mays program. However, I really want to hear from Linda not only the past, but the future and what's going on right now on this campus to continue Gail's legacy. Okay. Professor Linda Day.
Thanks, Liv. I know you all may be wondering, well, why is this woman wearing white? It's past Labor Day. I know it's past Labor Day. But actually, the white is traditional for many African American and Africana and African diaspora communities as a memorial for those who have passed. So in honor of Gail's passing and of the special day that we're having in her memory, I wore white. Also my arm, which I also wear as a symbol of everlasting life and our ancestral heritage that carries us through to the future, from the past to the future. But I did want to say that I didn't meet Gail Smith until about last year when she came back to the campus. Maybe 2 years ago, she came back to campus. But may I say that when I first came to Brooklyn College in 1992, I heard of her. And I heard about this woman, this accomplished black female professor who was teaching at the graduate school and who taught classics, and she spoke Latin and she spoke Greek. And I was like, wow, But she was always like this mythical figure. But when you talk about representation as a black female professor coming to Brooklyn College, just the fact that she existed was something that gave me a sense of pride and a sense of a path to follow and a place to be at Brooklyn College. I was very pleased that she was here, that she was somewhere at the Graduate Center. I didn't see her, though, until a couple of years ago, at which time I found that she was very warm, very welcoming, very thoughtful. She came to a meeting also of the Black Faculty of Color meeting and was ready to participate in that. As it is now, though, the Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship Program, I am now the director, and I am so pleased to be able to follow this legacy of excellence for students. It's been mostly brown and black students over the years who are then shepherded into finding their way, their path to academic excellence. That's what the Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship Program does. And we are still on that path, trying to identify students at Brooklyn College who usually don't necessarily know that they could be our apprentices. They could be PhDs. They could be college professors or higher education professionals in general. When I was in the dean's office, we generated a list of students with 3.5 GPAs. There are like 100 or 200 or 300 of them. And when I would speak to some of them, getting a PhD, though they are excellent academically, it did not occur to them. It never occurred to them that that was a path for them. So that's a lot of what I have to do as the director of the program here at Brooklyn College, is to let them know that yes, you have the talent, you have the skills, you have the academic intelligence that it takes to do this if you want to. And then our job is to help guide you, to help give you the resources that you could use to follow that path. So we're on that trajectory here at the program, and if any of you faculty members know of some students with 3.5 GPAs who are just kind of like, I don't know, maybe I'll work at Target, I don't know. Send them my way. Send them my way, and we'll see if we can convince them that they might actually be able to step in the shoes of the professors that they're talking to, that are talking to them. Because we are a commuter school, many of our students don't actually get to know their professors very well. So that's part of, I think, it's a structural gap for our college. But it's one that we're trying to bridge any way that we can. So that's me, that's what I have to say, and thank you all for listening. And let's continue on with our tribute to Gail Smith, her work, both in the Classics Department, in the Pipeline Program, and the Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship Program. Thank you.
Professor Day has been instrumental in shepherding many individuals from Brooklyn College onto PhDs who are now tenure track faculty members. I think having Professor Day as the director of Mellon Mays is the best tribute we can give to Gail Smith on this campus. Eric, would you come up here? So Eric got tasked with doing this in less than 24 hours. And what I want you to know is that he's eager to step up and tell you about Pipeline.
I'm just going to turn it over, and then I might say everything. But if you have to go, there's an exit at the back and the front. We understand that we're running a little over time. It's okay. There's a big policy council meeting that everyone has to get to.
Thank y'all, everyone. Again, don't mind me. Do what you go where you gotta go. I'm a little nervous, so apologies, but I must admit that I've never met Gail Smith personally. I did meet her through the archive, though. I took over as the assistant program officer in the program that Gail started at the Graduate Center in 1991. And I stumbled across about 6 filing cabinets full of the legacy of Gail Smith in starting the pipeline program, the Office of Educational Opportunity University, and the countless number of students that she has had an immense effect on at that time when she was running the program, and now as we're in our 32nd year of operating. The big takeaway from it was just the sheer amount of work and love and dedication and care that Gail put into the program. It absolutely blew me away. As a doctoral student myself, I had an idea for the dissertation work that I wanted to do, but uncovering the archive that had been sitting untouched for so long, and then at the same time listening to a group of faculty that had been a group of faculty of color that had been invited to the Graduate Center to welcome them into the CUNY community, and overhearing the amount of labor that was being done, that is, racialized and gendered labor being done to help students overcome the obstacles to getting a PhD, to getting a degree. Listening to that, on top of uncovering the archive, really left a mark on me that I can't shake. I feel like I've gotten to know Gail a lot more today, and I appreciate that. But in uncovering the legacy that Gail left for our program, I think it's given us a new life, for lack of a better word, to continue this work and to double down on making sure that we create the space and the opportunities and the loving spaces and the caring spaces that she clearly was instrumental in making happen at the Graduate Center and in the other programs that she was a part of. But all I can say is that while it's a solemn occasion, we're taking it as an opportunity to take her legacy further. And part of that is, of course, holding our leaders' feet to the fire and making sure that they make the resources available to these programs that are so important, and that we continue doing this work. Thank you so much. Thank you to the family. I kick myself for not having reached out to her earlier to get to know her and interview her. But I'm thankful and I appreciate being allowed to speak today. And yeah, thank you all.
After founding Pipeline, Gail understood what change was possible. She stepped into the role at the Office of Educational Opportunities and Diversity, and she dreamed bigger. She brought in over $11 million to CUNY to push students into doctoral programs, to lift up our community and create opportunities that were not there previously. Each step in her career, she understood the potential, and then she dreamed bigger. And she made that happen again and again and again. The final part of our formal program, before we retire to the reception, and there will be an open mic there if you have memories or comments or reflections that you feel inspired to say, please ask me for the mic. We want to hear more voices, not just the ones that we've scripted. I'd now like to invite forward the president of the Classical Association of Atlantic States, Matthias Hannes.
Thank you very much. Hello. Yeah, Matthias Hanses.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, no one ever gets it right. Not to worry. Yeah, I'm a professor at Penn State, a few hundred miles west of here, but I'm here today in my position currently as the current president of the Classical Association of the Atlantic States. I would like to express our condolences as a professional organization to Professor Smith's relatives, friends, and colleagues, and also our deep appreciation for Professor Smith as a Black woman scholar in our often too exclusionary field of the classics. I too have never met Professor Smith, but many of my colleagues in CAS, as we call it for short, have. And thankfully we have an awards committee that was already going to award her an Ovatio before she passed. Ovatio is what we call a sort of a lifetime work appreciation award. That is delivered in ancient Latin. And I think for that I will now hand the microphone over to, well, back to you. First.
This was in the works, not knowing Gail's health condition. And it was being drafted by Judith Hallett, a senior member of our field. For this event, she worked with our own Professor John Mansickle to create this Ovatio and then the translation. And so I would like now invite, to close us out, Professor John Mansickle forward to read the Latin Ovatio. I think for the live stream you have to have it.
Just hold it.
Neither did I.
I know. For memorial.
Since I'm representing the association, it's an honor that the president also came. I'm wondering, something that has not been handed out, but came from Judy Howell. What an honor and pleasure it was to know and work with her. No ego, no resentments, no non-negotiable demands, no hidden agendas. Just a focus on the task at hand and a powerful commitment to righting wrongs and creating learning and justice for all. That's Judith Hallett. Then I have this opportunity, whatever, to carry out this tradition. So we'll see what we can do with this. Judith drafted it, I tinkered with it, and I only feel humble when I think of the ability, anyway, we've done what we can. Gail Smith. Doleamus obitum nostrae sociae, non solum hoc ipso die, sed etiam in perenne saeco. Sociae verum aestimatae et magistrae verendam, vitam autem celebremus, tam operosam quam creativam collegae praestantis, quae talia tantaque prospere profecit, ut hanc hoc nostrum Rucminiensem collegium non sine magno Ilius labore floreret atque ingenio magistrali gauderet. Verum tamen illa sua auctoritate et indole non suo administrativo quasi consulare vel totam nostram universitatem civitatis novi e boraci emendavit atque roboravit. Infine, meliorem fecit, et reliquit nobis fortiorem. Urpi denique quic nostrae cives formavit, sapientiores et ingeniosiores opera sua magistrali produxit. Sicut communitatem fecit omnem concordiorem, munificiorem et praetoriorem. This is too small. Okay. clariorum. Ipsa nostra socia est adepta gradum baccalaureae artium apud universitatem voluptatibus diei carpentis faventem scilicet montis clari universitatis. In re publica libertatis verumque secundarum scilicet novae Caesareae. Transgressatum flumen Hudsonianum scilicet lumen patriae nostrae quasi renum, ipsa est quoque adepta gradum magistrae artium apud universitatem lumen in divino lumine visuram scilicet Columbianam, eadem ipsa infine impetravit gradum doctores philosophiae apud universitatem exhortantem ut perstaret et praestaret scilicet universitatem novi eboraci. Praesitit verum ipsa studio et labor, vel disciplina humaniore tam philologica quam historica. Commentarium composuit, perfecitque atque editit, quod explicat Plautinam commodiam, quae exprimit representatque aerumnas odiernas asperitatisque passas scervorum et re militare captivorum. Commodia ista olim laudata ut omnium fabularum Scanicarum Latinarum vel optima. Commentarium ergo in hanc commodiam provixit ipsa nostra socia, vel doctrinae, vel disciplinae perspicua, atque notabilis sicut prima istius commediae interpres, vel stirpis Africanae, vel feminarum doctarum. Praestitit quoque ipse laboribus aestivis, docendarum linguarum Latinae et Graecae in nostro collegio, fovenes primis temporibus nostro instituto Latino Greco. Studia verum et disciplinam academicam inter nos persequevatur docens illustransque litteras non solum antiquas Hellenicas Romanasque vel Plutarchum, sed etiam opera recentiora feminarum Africanarum scripta in lingua ultimorum Britannorum scilicet Anglica, exempli gratia auctores billis quickly vel Zora meo persum. Praestitit autem nostra socia, vel toti universitati civitatis novi eboraci magistra semper generosa et accurata, vice tamen assumpta ut dicam proconsulare constituit atque condidit nova officia muneraque pecuniaria obtinuit, quae fundamenta nova atque peculiaria ita ordinavit, administravit, atque rexit, ut pro discipulis pluribus diversarum originalium stirpium studia in compluribus ramis eruditionis adjuvarentur. Insomma, socia nostra creavit et administravit cohortes qui instituere in universitati omni maiorem aequitatem justitiamque omnibus discipulis civibusque. Vixit, et cursum quem dedit fortuna honorifice peregit. Honoremus Gail Smith, beatae memoriae.
Thank you, John. We're going to draw to the close this formal portion of our programming. I must say that at these times at CUNY, Pulling something like this off is hard, and many, many groups contributed to make this possible. I want to thank the Black faculty and staff group. I want to thank the Wolf Institute. I want to thank Africana Studies, the Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences, the Provost's office. Everyone chipped in to make this happen here today. Thank you so much for being here. And please join us. We have more food than you can possibly imagine. Thank you.
Does everyone know that the food is in the Kimmick reading room? It's the Lily Pond room. That's where it is. The Lily Pond room. Go across this lobby and around the corner to the Lily Pond room where you will see all the food in the world. The Lily Pond room. It's that one.
I'll check.